Hello everyone, welcome to a video that is a bit off the beaten path, but I don't know if it's just me, but it seems like gaming YouTube these days is taking itself way too seriously.
He turns to me and he says, "Why so serious?"
I mean, way too seriously, to the point where half the videos are boring and hard to get through, and then the other half want you to sign a petition or something at the end of them. I'm not really into that sort of thing, and so I thought, why don't I lead by example here and come up with a video concept that is fun, that is entertaining, but is not trying to change the world or change your life. We are merely here to have a good time. So let's discuss the 7 coolest gaming studios of all time. Why 7? Because 10 is too standard and 5 just isn't enough. So 7 is the sweet spot. But before we get into the list, I think there are some ground rules we need to establish just so we're all on the same page. The first being is that I by no means consider myself to be the guru of coolness. I am personally not a cool person. I am a closeted nerd at best. But being a lifelong closeted nerd, I have had the opportunity to spend time around truly cool people to try and learn and understand them and hopefully pass that on a little bit in today's video. The second thing we need to discuss, of course, is what is cool? What is the definition of coolness, at least for this video? And in this video, we are not going by what you learned on the Disney Channel or what your mom told you before you went to school about being cool. It's about being true to yourself, about being cool in your heart. No, we're talking about what is actually cool, what would get you friends, what would get you dates, what would get you invited to parties, what would get you into higher social circles, what would get you basically anything you wanted with the lift of your finger. That is what is truly cool. And so with that definition established, there are actually some criteria that we can look at that I think are good barometers of judging whether something is cool or not. The first one is edginess. And the idea with edginess is you want to be fashionably edgy. You don't want to be so edgy that you're cringe and lame and creepy. That's going too far. But if you're not edgy at all, then you're just boring. So you want to be that nice sweet spot of a little bit edgy, but you're still digestible to normal people. The second criteria we can look at is unhealthiness, riskiness. And this is something that I think Hollywood these days really struggles to understand, and why Hollywood cannot create cool characters anymore. Because I think there's this sort of, parent-teacher conference idea that being healthy is being cool. Being a good person and making the right choices, that's what's cool. Again, if that were true, then I would be like the coolest person ever, right? But that's not the idea. The idea of being cool is you're kind of making slightly bad choices, but not so bad that it's sad and pathetic and people look at you like, you're a meth head in a trailer park or something. That's going too far, but you need to be a little bit unhealthy. It's not great long term, and the idea of being cool is that you can only be cool for a short period of time. You cannot carry that throughout your life, because then you end up in the washed up, lame, cringy category. You just have those glory years of coolness and then you move on. But in order to achieve that, you need to be kind of breaking the rules a little bit. You need to be a little bit bad. So that's the second criteria. The third criteria is seriousness, where if you are overly serious, you're overly invested in things, that isn't cool. But if you're not serious ever and you're like a goofy clown, that isn't cool either. You need to have that nice middle ground of seriousness where you're serious, but you're not going to lose sleep over things. You're not going to get riled up about things and go on angry rants. You're not going to go that far, right? You're just going to be serious enough to maybe make a snarky joke or something, but you're not going to go all the way in with getting fired up and ranting or whatever. And then last, we could talk about just effortlessness, and this is a little bit harder to quantify, but being cool is being effortless, where you're not ever trying at anything. It's just coming to you. You're just flowing with it. This is why making a list about what is cool would disqualify me from being cool, or trying to quantify what is cool would disqualify me from being cool, because if you are cool, you don't worry about being cool. You don't think about being cool, at least not on the surface, right? You're moving instinctually. It's flowing. It's natural. People can feel it. They can just tell You're oozing coolness, but it's not something that's artificial. So those are the elements of being cool. But to make this a little bit nerdier, I have two other rules that I want to include here. The first rule, you could call this like the Linkin Park rule, is no retrospective coolness. That is not allowed. So retrospective coolness is in your time, you were not cool. But when people look back on it, you're like, oh, you know, looking back on that, that was pretty cool. No, part of being cool is you need to be cool in the time. So Linkin Park, is beloved as they are now, and people look back on them and say, oh, they're really ahead of their time. They're really, you know, doing things that today we consider cool. Well, at the time, they were going too far that direction. They were not cool. So no Linkin Park, no retrospective coolness. On the flip side, no retrospective cringiness. So this could be like the Dane Cook rule, where at the time, Dane Cook was super cool, right? If you wanted to go on a date, you wanted to bring a girl, you wanted to impress her, you take her to like a Dane Cook show. You wouldn't take her to like a Ron White show or something. So even though Dane Cook was cool at the time, these days he's sort of washed up and kind of pathetic and cringy. But in the time he was cool, and so that would count because he was in the moment, he was cool. And so now let's talk about game studios, because if you start trying to bring the retrospective perspective or trying to say, well, now it's cringy or whatever, it gets too complicated. So we got to evaluate them in their time. So let's begin with number 7 on the list, Midway. Midway these days are kind of washed up and lame, but in their time, Midway were really cool for a number of reasons. The first, of course, being Mortal Kombat. Mortal Kombat was a very cool game because of the blood, because of the violence, because of the fatalities, because it had parent-teacher associations getting mad at people. They had to establish the ESRB because of how violent the game was at the time. All elements of being very cool.
First, we have Mortal Kombat, which is a martial arts contest involving digitized characters. We're going to show two versions of the game. When a player wins, the so-called death sequence begins. The game narrator instructs the player to finish, and I quote, finish his opponent. The player may then choose a method of murder, ranging from ripping a heart out to pulling off the head of the opponent with spinal cord attached.
But it wasn't overly violent. It wasn't overly edgy. It wasn't like Postal, where you feel like a sociopath. You know, it didn't go that far. It was just edgy enough to really check all those boxes. And on top of that, Midway also did some other cool stuff, like all their sports games were really fun. They weren't all that serious, and they were just great arcade action that you could have your friends come over. You could play some Blitz, you can play some NBA Jam, you can play some Wayne Gretzky 3D hockey. All of them have iconic moments that people look back on now and say, that was cool, right? And at the time it was cool as well. Like in Blitz, you're just sacking people, breaking their arms, breaking all the rules of football. I remember I played Blitz for years and thought I understood football, and then I watched it on TV, like, why is football so boring and stupid when Blitz was so awesome, right? Same thing with Wayne Gretzky 3D hockey, where half the game you're actually playing hockey, and then the other half of the game you're just beating each other up and getting in fist fights. And then I'd watch hockey, I'd be like, where's the fist fights? Where's the part where they're taking off their gloves and punching each other out? Just great stuff. And then sadly, EA came along and made sports games from cool to sports games being really lame and boring and corporate and stupid. So thanks for that, EA. If there was a list of least cool studios, EA would be very high on that list. Number 6, though, on the list of cool studios is Namco. Now, Namco are cool for a number of reasons, and I think their glory days of coolness were the 90s and 2000s. They still do some cool stuff from time to time, but these days, their properties are a little bit on the nerdier side of things. Where in the early 2000s and 90s, Tekken, Soul Calibur, Dead to Rights, all very cool properties. All stuff that if you brought your friends over from school, you wouldn't be embarrassed to have some Tekken or some Soul Calibur or some Dead to Rights. You wouldn't be like, what are you playing, you nerd? You know, these are cool games. And one thing that I've always wanted to say about Soul Calibur that I cannot believe Namco got away with is whenever you talk about like sexualization in video games, you know, poor Team Ninja always are getting ran over. They're always getting in trouble for that sort of stuff. I mean, I can see why. But I just think it's funny that Namco got away with Soul Calibur for so long. Where you look at the models in Soul Calibur, especially Soul Calibur 2, I remember as a teenager thinking this is very cool, especially models like Taki and stuff. I mean, I cannot believe they got away with that, and really, that doesn't really stick with Namco the same way it sticks with Team Ninja. But if you look at their Soul Calibur models, yeah, edgy, but just the right amount of edgy, I will say. So Namco, and then last, on top of that, of course, all their arcade stuff. Arcade stuff is just naturally cool because it's more oriented towards the general social public, more oriented towards people who aren't super deep into video games getting into them. But we got to talk about the GunCon and Time Crisis. These were very cool. Light gun games are one of the coolest genres in video games, period. Again, if it's a genre of video game that gets people upset, gets people riled up, gets people nervous, and of course you can have people come over and genuinely play it on dates and things like that, that's a good idea. And the GunCon of all the light guns is actually clearly the coolest light gun too, and Time Crisis, one of the coolest series. So Namco definitely, I think, deserve their spot on the number 6 list. Number 5, id Software. No surprise here. And of course, the games that make id cool, and kind of the only games that make it cool in my opinion, are early Doom and early Quake, and of course especially Doom, because again, making people angry, making people say video games are destroying the world. Doom is such a beast that even now people will refer to Doom as like causing violence in the world and everything like that. Like 20 years ago, they'll still be like, those damn kids are still playing Doom and it's still causing problems. So Doom, for sheer edginess, definitely deserves a spot on the list, but also because they just really were ahead of the time and people recognize that. So it's not good enough to be ahead of the time. You also need to be recognized for being ahead of the time and have people looking at you and saying, wow, they're really doing something special here with Doom and Quake. We need to get on this. And so I think id Software are incredibly influential, and one of the greatest video game quotes of all time has come from id Software, which is, and I've pulled up the exact quote here, "Story in a game is like story in a porn movie. It's expected to be there, but it's not that important." By John Carmack. Very cool quote, something I will probably discuss in length in a video in the future. I think there's a lot more going on with this quote than people give it credit for, and I do agree with it in many senses, even though I've heard people talking smack about that quote over the years, especially like RPG fans or whatever. But I think there's a lot to it, and I think it's cool. There's just a lot of cool stuff that it did back in the day. I think they gave away like a Corvette or something in one of their Quake tournaments. Very cool company. Number 4 on the list, Team Ninja. Of course, Team Ninja has to be on the list because they're my favorite gaming company these days, and I think they're very cool, and they've remained fairly cool over the years, though they've gone a little bit to the nerdier side, a little bit to the weeaboo nerd side, but in their prime, Team Ninja were among the coolest companies of all time, especially with franchises like Dead or Alive and, of course, Ninja Gaiden. So the thing about Dead or Alive that I don't think people quite remember is that up until Dead or Alive 4, I would say, the cringiness levels, the edginess levels, the sexualization levels, I think were spot on, where they were sexual, they had the jiggle physics, but they weren't over the top to where now they're being cringy and nerdy. They didn't go that far. I think 5, especially with Marie Rose, they kind of went down that road of being over the top there. But up until that point, I think they were very cool, especially with Ninja Gaiden and the combination of violence and beauty. I think that's the design idea behind Team Ninja games, where they are beautiful in many ways, graphically, artistically, and not just women-wise, but the backgrounds, the stages, the water, the trees, all that is so beautiful, the flowers. And then on top of that, they overlay brutal, ruthless, bloody violence, people getting their heads chopped off, blood spurting out of their limbs and everything, demons, monsters, all that stuff. Very, very cool. So Team Ninja, for that alone, I think definitely deserve to be on the list. And of course, they came up with jiggle physics, which to this day remain controversial. If you're remaining controversial over all these years, again, like id Software, you're doing something right in the cool department. That's my opinion, at least. Number 3 on the list, Capcom. Now, Capcom I think are a bit of a sleeper pick because Capcom have such a wide umbrella of games that they've made many games that are not cool, like Street Fighter V. But they've made many games that are very cool, and I think the gem of their crown of coolness is, of course, the Resident Evil series. Resident Evil is a very cool property. You could bring up Resident Evil. It could be something that you could play on a date, or at least mention on a date, or someone's coming over, you're throwing all your nerd games in the corner. I guess I could leave Resident Evil out. That sort of stuff. Resident Evil is a very cool series. Of course, I think Resident Evil 4 is their coolest game of all time, but I might be just too biased to see past that, because I think Resident Evil Remake is also very cool and a little bit scarier, which really works for it. And then some of their other series, Street Fighter I think is moderately cool. It isn't as cool as Mortal Kombat. Of course, game-wise, Street Fighter is just a much better series, but we're not talking about game-wise. We're not talking about nerd cool. We're talking about actually cool, right? So Street Fighter I think is a little bit less cool than Mortal Kombat, but still a series that was cool and people recognized. You could wear like a Ryu shirt around the mall or something and people wouldn't be like, oh, nerd, maybe they would. It's a little bit on the edge there. Mega Man's pretty cool. Mega Man X is pretty cool. But yeah, Capcom, especially for Resident Evil, I think deserved to be pretty high on that list for that series alone. Number 2 on the list, this is going to make some people angry, but we gotta speak the truth here. Konami. Konami are a very cool company. Now these days, they've gone off the rails, so we won't talk about today Konami, but back in the day, Konami were incredibly cool. Their series just ooze coolness and ooze style and flavor and just have all the elements of being cool, where they're not too serious but they're interesting, they're edgy but not too edgy. Silent Hill, genuinely scary but not cringy. Metal Gear, very, very cool. Probably one of the coolest characters in all of video games is Solid Snake. The fact that he's named Solid Snake, it's like kind of funny, but it just all works, right? Metal Gear is very cool. And to tell you how cool Metal Gear is one of those franchises where if you're trying to use a username from a Metal Gear game, is actually super hard. And I remember when I first started online, I wanted my online handle to be Sniper Wolf, and then I was gonna, I'd go, instead of being Mark MSX, I at one point was considering calling myself Sniper Wolf, but of course when you type Sniper Wolf in, there's like this famous cosplay girl with the name Sniper Wolf. So if you have famous cosplay girls taking characters from your game, that's saying something. And so Metal Gear I think is a very cool series. If they ever made a movie of it, I think that would even push it higher if the movie was good. That might be determined. But yeah, Metal Gear is a very cool series. And then on top of that, Konami, outside of just their main properties, they also sort of had that touch of coolness where every game they made, every game they sort of got their hands on for a time there was just cool. Batman Returns on the Super Nintendo, very cool port, very cool presentation. Turtles in Time, people love Turtles in Time. It translates across many audiences. Just great game itself, very stylish. Konami just had that in the bag. They were just a very cool company. And that leads us to the coolest video game company of all time. This should not be that surprising of a pick. Of course, we are talking about Sega. Sega are clearly the coolest video game company of all time. In fact, Sega were so cool, I'm pretty sure that's what caused their downfall. Unlike something like Nintendo, where they're sitting in boardrooms and they're talking about profits, I swear Sega board meetings must have been them just drinking out of whiskey bottles with sunglasses, being like, that sounds cool. Doesn't this sound cool? Drop it. Let's spend the money. Hey, we can't just make the Dreamcast. That's not financially responsible. Screw that shit. Let's do it. That seems like Sega's guiding philosophy over the years. It's just, is this cool? Yes, let's do it. Unfortunately, like I said earlier in the video, coolness over time is not necessarily the healthiest life decision. At some point, you got to get off the coolness train and be a little bit more lame, a little bit more normie. But I think in their day, Sega were clearly the coolest company. And it's not just Sonic. I actually don't think Sonic is as cool as some of their other properties. But they have so many cool properties, it's hard to really nail down which ones are the coolest. But I just think everything about them, their consoles, their ideas, their franchises, their ports. Again, Sega had blood on the Sega Genesis. They went all in on making the Sega Genesis cool. That was like part of their marketing. Same thing with the Saturn and Dreamcast. I don't think that worked as well, but that was sort of the idea. And so I think Sega, unfortunately, it was their own undoing. But at the same time, They were very cool. And like the coolest person in high school, they're sort of washed up now, right? Their glory days are behind them. But Sega can still be cool from time to time, like allowing Shenmue 3 to be made or allowing Sonic Mania to be made by some ROM hacker guy. They are just a cool company, for better or worse, and so this is my list of the 7 coolest gaming companies of all time. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you didn't, that's alright. You can just move. We can all just move on with our lives. I had a fun time making it at the very least, and so like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. I'll probably mix in some of these types of videos from now on because, you know, it is nice to have a change of pace and sort of see the type of content you want to see other channels making from time to time. So, adios, everyone. Thank you to the $5 patrons: 100, Dingo, Another Joe, Anthony A, Aaron Iodice, Aaron Solis, Ben, Blur STG, Borgie22, Brian Reboot, Brian Shiver, Bubblegum Crisis 1394, Chris Yuzefovich, Chronic Burnout 3, Corey Mark, Danielle Savage, Darren Griffin, Delta Tango 6, Disco Star Slayer, DJ 420, Praise It, Dubs, Entropy, Eric H, FCK, Full Set, Retro Schmupper, Hausu, Ilya, Kiwi, JLab, JB RPG, Gymnasium, Joe Angelo, John Kelly, Gameboy Guru, K, K2, Kikoman 589, Larridge, Malaise, Mark Toms, Maz, Megadeth 859, Minong, Mechalin, Mitch LY, Queen Charlene, Nathaniel Davis, and Electron, Neon Dagger Games, Okla Googles, Philip Mason, Portal 63, Rattlecat, Raul, Real Skeen, Riff Mason, Scanline City, 7 Overdose, Shane Sintinsky, SLW, Sniper's Paradise, The Boot Rex, The Real Ikuzo, The Dirty Screech, The Old Bensta, TRM Sugumo, Twilight EX, Plasmo, and Utskaya. Thanks for watching.